I get it. You followed the men's game for years. You know which teams are good, which teams are bad. You know the players, the tactics, the vibe. You might have watched the odd bit of the women, but they clash with your club team, or maybe you're playing on weekends, or heaven forbid, just using your Saturday for something that isn't rugby. And now you look ahead at the 2025 Women's Rugby World Cup, just days away, and don't even know where to begin. If you're a fan of the men's game, getting your head around a world where Canada are better than South Africa is weird, intimidating. A brand new world existing within one you thought you already knew. And yet, there's little you can do within rugby that's more rewarding and, for me, goddamn exciting than investing your interest in women's rugby right now. The sport is currently exploding. Crowds up 20 times intensity through a multi-story car park's worth of roofs, profile expanding by the day. In an era that's been weird for men's rugby, existential threats crawling out of every crevice, women's rugby has shown us a different possible future. A brighter, more open, more attacking, more inclusive, more inspiring, more forward-looking version of the game. So, with the World Cup just days away, we want to offer you, yes, you, the definitive guide to women's rugby, and in particular, the 2025 World Cup for fans of the men's. Ultimately, this guide could be very simple. The only difference between men's and women's rugby is who's playing it. Unlike tennis, which adapts rules, or cricket, where women only need 4 days to finish a match that takes men 5, the laws of the game are exactly the same for men or women. Rugby union is the same for everyone, regardless of size, shape, or gender, providing you aren't trans, in which case rugby's whatever cowardly film make J.K. Rowling less likely to tweet about those running the game. And yet, to reduce the women's game to just men's rugby, but with more X chromosomes, is to do a massive disservice to not just a proud, brilliant history, but a game that over the last 15 years has evolved to be a completely different tactical animal. We hear the constant complaints in the men's game. There's too much bloody kicking in modern rugby. What's these bloody caterpillar rucks? What are they all about? Give me continuity, tries, running rugby. I don't know what any of those voices were. Well, what have I told you? Women's rugby is kind of the game those folk have been craving, rebirthed. If you strip it all back, the heart of strategy in rugby union is assessing the balance between possession and territory. Would you rather have the ball in your own half or risk the opposition having it in theirs? Everything else is built on top of that essential conundrum, and perhaps the biggest difference for a viewer between watching the men's and women's game is that the meta, the most ideal type tactics, has a totally different balance between the two gendered sides. Teams that don't get turned over, or commit a handling error, go into touch, etc., tend to kick the ball away after about 4 phases in men's rugby right now. In women's rugby, the average count is about 8. And even then, those sets are more often ended by the team scoring than kicking the ball away. It's one thing that will strike you instantly if you have a tactical feel for the game over in testicle land. Watching your team attack feels different in the women's game. Teams playing repeat phases from their own half to the try line, taking upwards of 20 phases to get there, making up 50 metres in that run, honestly isn't that uncommon, and will likely happen a similar number of times in this 6-week tournament, the entire 25-26 men's domestic season. Where men's rugby tends to be a war of attrition played over 80 minutes, women's rugby feels more like a set of individual battles stitched together. Which side wins an individual passage of play is more important than in the men's game, where one decent kick is more likely to undo an enormous amount of effort. As such, those passages tend to be much longer, leading to fewer stoppages, and hence the games tend to finish something much closer to 80 minutes or 90 minutes of half time, instead of the full 2 hours that most men's games at test level take to complete. Obviously, different sides play differently. Either men might be the side who play the longest sets of possession in their side of the game, but the women kick on an earlier phase count than anyone else in theirs. They're Ronan O'Gara-esque young 10 Donna O'Brien at the heart of these tactics, but on a basic strategic level, the core balance is just different. Most teams keep the ball in hand, even on slow ball or backtracking scenarios where men's sides would hang it in the air. The number of box kicks is hence drastically lower. Of the starting 9 for each men's Six Nations team this year, Antoine Dupont for France hung the fewest box kicks over that tournament with 28, a number that would have been higher had he not played just 235 minutes. Of the starting 9s for each of the women's Six Nations teams this year, only Italy's Sofia Stefan hung more than 28 box kicks, the lowest figure in the men's game. Every team kicks less. Despite former Wales coach, now in charge of Fiji, Johan Cunningham trying to change this, the contestable box kick is not a major part of women's rugby right now. There are a few reasons for this, some of them intangibles that we'll never understand, some things just traditions that they don't quite seep in, but I think a big primary one is how different the equation is at the breakdown. Most turnovers in the women's game are won by blast, not jackal. Blowing people off the ball, huge counter-attack efforts are the name of the game. As such, players like Ireland's Aoife Wafer or Wales's Alex Callender, who are world-class jackalers akin to a Richie McCaw or Sam Warburton in the men's game, are worth their weight in gold. Even more so than a first-race veteran penis rugby, turnovers in the women's game are generally team efforts, years. Several players committing at the same time, at the same moment to win it back. So one player being able to do that on their own is enormous. Analogous to having a dude so tall you don't need to lift them in the line out. As such, with the reduced threat of losing the ball and even less of conceding a penalty whilst in possession, playing the ball for long periods becomes less of a risk. Quite why that jackal is rarer, I couldn't necessarily say, but the average tackle completion has been higher in the last 3 women's Six Nations than men's, implying a different defensive focus. An average of 74 players per team per game were lobbed into defensive rucks in the men's Six Nations this year, which is 50 in during the women's tournament. Instead of challenging the breakdown, focus goes on getting players on their feet, ready for the next challenge. I think there's an element of chicken and the egg here, right? Players have to leave the breakdown alone because sides attack for longer, they throw more at you, so you have to make more tackles, which tires players out, creates more fatigue, meaning they then can't attack the breakdown further down the line. But also, teams kind of only attack more because the breakdown is being left at a better chance at creating fatigue and less risk of losing the ball. Likewise, the average ruck speed in women's rugby right now is faster than men's. Scotland were the only side in this year's Six Nations whose men produce quicker ball than women, largely a product of this tackle-first approach with fewer players being put into the ruck and hence allowing the ball to then get even faster still because no one's slowing it down phase on phase on phase. There is another key reason, however, and it's part of a debate that goes right back to the dawn of the international game. The first ever Women's Rugby World Cup took place entirely unsanctioned by the International Rugby Board in 1991, a few months before the second edition of the men's tournament. Without any backing or finance from either the IRB or RFU, it was arranged in the space of about 6 months by 4 incredible women who met playing for Richmond Rugby Club. Deborah Griffin, Sue Dorrington, Mary Forsyth, and Alice Cooper, no relation. 12 teams took part with varying levels of expertise and professionalism. When the New Zealand team had trained together for a month, Japan rocked up to their first game against France with a team boasting a combined total of 0 caps. Geopolitical reasons meant the Soviet Union side, whose most experienced player took up the game 10 months earlier, were unable to bring currency into Cardiff, so forced to barter their way through the tournament, selling vodka, dolls, tobacco, trinkets, whatever they could, eventually taken in by a local cafe, let them sleep upstairs and provide the forward breakfast for them every morning. The USA went on to win that tournament. To this day, one of only 3 sides to ever do so. England took the next title in 1994, then 20 years later, again in 2014. New Zealand have won every other edition. 6 World Cups, including the most recent. In 2022, even though it was the 2021 World Cup, it was a whole thing. Won in a jubilant, sold-out Eden Park, a day that changed the Black Ferns forever, which is also an important note for anyone hopping across. They're the Black Ferns, not the All Blacks. The name was chosen by the players in 1998 for a simple reason. After winning their first World Cup, the Kiwi press took very fondly to the nickname the Gal Blacks. The players, understandably, thought this was a bloody hateful name. This is just an awful name. So Captain Farrah Palmer led a charge to select a new one, the players landing on the Black Ferns, a moniker now synonymous with success. Similarly, it's worth doing because it's so easy to get caught out if you're new to this. The USA are the Eagles in both versions, but Australia are the Wallaroos, a name that makes total sense, seeing as it's the term for a female wallaby. Instead of Flying Fijians, they're the Fijiana. Rather than the Brave Blossoms, Japan are the Sakura 15, which is a type of blossom tree. South Africa are very particular about it, right? They're not the Springboks, they're the Springbok women, and honestly kind of bullshit differentiation. And where England men are merely known as those pricks, the women have a distinct nickname of their own, the Red Roses. And whilst they may smell a sweet by any other name, England are kind of the Ellie Kildunaphan in the room for this entire World Cup. Led by former All Black head coach John Mitchell, more recently deployed by Eddie Jones as the guy who stands near him to make him look like less of a psychopath to his players by comparison, the Red Roses are yet to lose a game this World Cup cycle. In fact, they've only lost 1 of their 57 games since March 2018. It's just that game happened to be the last World Cup final. The 2022 showpiece was honestly the best Rugby World Cup final ever played. The highest scoring either gender has ever seen, and if you're infused, excited, and want to dive into more right after this video the moment it's over, I'd recommend going and watching that game back on full. It is on YouTube, and it's honestly one of the best games ever played. The drama drips through the screen, even knowing what Jonah Narwu does in the final play of the game. It's so rewarding and so worth watching. Since then, England have been maniacally in chase of perfection on a level legitimately I don't think we've ever seen before from any team. They are a side who won 99 times out of 100 in 2022, and they were taught that isn't good enough. As such, they've become relentless, basically blowing every opposition away for 3 straight years, including New Zealand and France, the only 2 teams to have beaten them in the last 9 years. England are not just the best team in the world over in this version. They're favourites on par of the men's Springboks being entered into a lower level weight grade league. It's beyond the 2011 All Blacks level. If they win, they have a genuine shout at being the closest thing we've ever seen to a perfect rugby team. If they lose to New Zealand, it's the sporting story of the year. If they lose to anybody else, quite honestly, it might be comparable to Japan in Brighton as the biggest upset in the sport's history. There is, however, one other team beside New Zealand who might fancy their chances. If you're planning on watching this World Cup, prepare to fall in love with Canada. This is one of the biggest leaps you have to make as a fan of the men's game coming over. For the better part of the last decade, there's been a very clear top four. England, New Zealand, France, and Canada. Whilst France have slipped off a tad lately, they're still stacked with incredible amounts of talent. Gabrielle Vernier is one of my 15 favourite players to watch in the world. You can win cuddly toys at fun fairs bigger than her, yet she runs with the force of a roller coaster and hits so hard she could probably kill someone playing cornhole. Second row Medusa Fowl, sister of, oh yeah, remember him, France winger Benjamin, is an utter monster, and their entire back three are endless fun and destruction, yet Canada might be dark horses for the entire tournament. They're currently ranked number 2 in the world, having achieved a win and a draw against the Black Ferns over the last 18 months, and when they played England last autumn, Red Roses winger Jess Breach says the most worried she's been in a test career that they might lose. Kevin Royer's team are legitimately one of the best teams in the world to watch. They play like nobody else. Centre Flo Simmons is amongst the form players on the planet right now, so explosive and balanced. Think Hugh Jones if she ends every other sentence in A. Captain Alex Tessier is a faultless ball playing 10-12 with a gorgeous knack for finding time on the ball. Veteran flanker Karen Pakwan is still unbelievably all action at age 38. Fullback Julia Schell and trio of wingers Alicia Corrigan, Paige Farries and Fancy Bermudez, yes, Fancy Bermudez, that's a real name, it's not a luxury chocolate, it's a Canadian rugby player, are all electric, capable of creating something from anywhere. Yet, Canada also boasts perhaps the second most remarkable all-round freak rugby athlete on the planet after Aled Davis. Sorry, I just had the initials AD, the 9 jersey jotted down. It's the other one, isn't it? Ignore me. Sophie de Goede was born to do this. The daughter of Canada's captain from the first ever men's World Cup and first ever women's, de Goede is a utility forward lately deployed by Canada in the second row rather than just an 8 shirt, thanks to the form of the fantastic Fabiola Forteza, and de Goede can do literally anything. I genuinely think she is the most complete forward the game has seen since John Eales. Her team's first-line goal kicker, main line-out caller, primary carrier, key breakdown threat, and often a handy distributor, slotting into playmaking positions regularly to partner up with Claire Gallagher and Tessier to create a classic 10-12-4 combo. Honestly, if you watch the World Cup for just one player, de Goede might just be that person, though there are plenty more to keep an eye on. This one's pretty easy to remember as a fan of men's rugby. The best scrum half in the world is the one that plays for France and to lose. However, unlike her good friend Antoine, Pauline Bourdon-Sansus took that title not from some random South African dude, but her now retired wife. PBS, aptly named because watching her really does feel like a public service, is a concentrated shot of licorice into a team's veins, a rare player who inspires chaos yet somehow always seems to hold her head. A truly glorious and only slightly insane player. However, there's another subplot surrounding Princess Pauline, for she is also women's rugby's proudest and perhaps only exponent of the drop goal. Just 3 successful drop goals have ever been kicked in the Women's Rugby World Cup, the most recent coming in 2010. In 8 seasons, Premiership Women's Rugby, the biggest pro league in the world, has seen just 4 drop goals. When asked why they're so rare by the ever excellent Fee Thomas, scorer of 1/4 of all the drop goals in women's professional rugby over the last decade, Saracen Sarah McKenna, had a simple theory. Scorelines are bigger in women's rugby. Over the last 5 years, more points and more tries have been scored in the Women's Six Nations every single year than the men's. As such, the value of 3 points is watered down, and the 2 or 4 you miss out on by not going for the try feels more drastic. It makes more of an impact. The loss is felt. This counts for penalty goals too, which are desperately less common than in the men's game. France are virtually the only team in the world who regularly take them as an option, helped by the emergence this year of Morgan Bourgeois, who managed to take Thomas Ramos' knack for slotting everything from the back without his penchant for doing the most insane thing you've ever seen in your life whenever the pressure's on. In fact, in the 60 plus games involving qualified teams for this year's tournament, played over 2025 so far, there have been just 16 penalty goals converted, and 8 of those, half of the total number, were kicked by France. All of those by Morgan Bourgeois, who has officially kicked as many first-class international penalty goals this year as all 4 billion other women in the world combined. For comparison, right? 4 of the 6 teams in this year's men's Six Nations slotted more goals than we saw in the entire women's tournament on their own. Owen Farrell kicked 15 penalties in the last men's World Cup, likely more than we'll see from all 512 players in this tourney combined. Tries are the order of the day on the women's side of the draw. This itself plays a huge part in why teams keep the ball in their hands so long, combined with the aforementioned factor that goes back to the dawn of the game. When interviewed at that first World Cup, then England coach Steve Dowling said the only real difference between coaching men's and women's rugby was because a lot of the players took up the game at a later age rather than 5 or 6. Kicking came less naturally and was hence less common. The side only had one quality kicker and everybody else was discouraged hence from doing it. So they played more ball in hand. I hate to say it, but until fairly recently, a level of this has remained true. A lot of players taking up the game in the late teens rather than early childhood. Something that's really starting to change over the last 5-6 years, but even at the last World Cup, we saw decent decent number of teams rock up without a kicker who'd thump it over 35 metres, which changed the tactical balance and made exiting in particular much more difficult, often fundamentally changing the flow of the game because you couldn't really get out from being under pressure, but also leading to more teams taking risks and running it out of their own 22 or trying chip kicks or small manoeuvres. As such, what we here at Squidge Towers call the bullshit player is universally more valuable in women's rugby. If the ball goes through the hands more, if players are making more tackles, hence more likely to get tired or caught in a weird, unfamiliar position, having someone who can pull something out of nowhere is drastically more valuable in the men's game, where sets are shorter, sharper, and less likely to create breakaway situations where things are disjointed through attrition. So with lesser emphasis on the kicking game, players with a tractor engine at the end of the leg have always carried the heaviest heap of bullshit in their pocket, be it Carla Negri smashing Italy into the lead here in 1991, or the legendary Jessie Tremoulier, whose enormous Franz Stein-esque boot revolutionised women's rugby prior to her retirement last year. In the modern game, players like O'Brien, Bourgeois, the outstanding Scotland game manager Helen Nelson, or Wales's Flaky George, nicknamed 5022, are invaluable as such. However, that shift doesn't mean distance is everything. Blackfern's co-captain, Rui Demant, is a world-class unpicker of defence and a thinker on the game. Think of pre-drop goal addiction George Ford and you're kind of there. And a huge part of why is because she's regarded correctly as one of the best kickers in the game. But where anyone in the men's game would ask for 50 metres off you to win that title, Demand doesn't need a siege gun. Her skill set is more subtle, but no less exceptional. Something that's true across the entire Fern squad. The smiling assassin Stacey Wacker is like Lacaniwao with the biggest grin in the world plastered across their face. The Bremner sisters, Chelsea and Alana, are perfect all-round modern back five players. Hooker Georgia Ponsonby is archetypal, but the headline is coming on the wing, where the GOAT has returned. Portia Woodman-Whitcliffe, having retired after the last World Cup, is back. And the only world-class winger named after a Shakespeare play dove back into the fray this year and instantly refound her best, scoring a truly incredible 7 tries in her second game back against a USA side touting not just superstar Alona Mark, receiving her only mention in this video, sorry Alona, but she will be playing, it's very exciting, she'll be there opening night, but someone who should have the same profile, Hope Rogers, the dynamite bulldozing prop who might just be the best player the USA has ever produced, sorry Colin Hawley. Woodman-Whitcliffe, like Bordon Sasusen, who fell in love with a teammate and dubbed by their name, is simultaneously women's rugby's Jonah Lomu and their Brian Habana, a truly remarkable, unstoppable try scorer. She enters this World Cup on 48 international touchdowns, just one behind Doug Howlett's overall record for a New Zealand senior team, and there's a very, very good chance she breaks that over the next few weeks, because we are in for a truly exciting tournament. There isn't a team turning up in England this year without at least a few standout names. South Africa bring us Aziza Hele, the rampaging Route 1 number 8, who's almost impossible to stop, and the growing influence of their men's team. Coached by former Razzie right-hand man Swiss de Bruyn, there's been a very conscious sharing of IP, of coaching information between the two senior teams, leading to a side who play a lot like an underdog version of the men's Springboks, right down to an incredible, unstoppable scrum. South Africa have won just one pool game at a World Cup in their history, but if they do it again this year, it'll likely be thanks to outstanding props, Sanasiwe Charlie, and particularly Babalasha. Keep an eye out for Babalasha. If they do it, however, it might just be up against Brazil, who boast a brilliant 7 specialist winger in Bianca Silva, and their inspiring, dynamic, exceptional captain, Aisling Coimbra. Spain's utterly magic winger, Claudia Pena, has been one of the signings of the season for Harlequins this year, where she plays with her captain and brilliant tight head prop, Laura Delgado. Japan's access of 4'9" scrum half, Megumi Abe, and the uber-skillful Ayasa Otsuka should be great fun to watch. I mentioned them earlier, but Aoife Wafer and Alex Callender are two of the best players in the world right now. All action, unstoppable player of the Six Nations Wafer, covering, thankfully, from a nasty injury to make this tournament a brilliant carrier, just a complete all-round game. And Callender handed the captaincy as being Curry's best player for the last few years. Honestly, if you're into men's rugby, it's not that hard to learn. Wales finished last in the Six Nations, but have one unbelievable world-class talent in the 7 shirt and the captain's armband. Italy, like their men now, play incredibly fun rugby. Coach Fabio Roselli was the guy who made Zebre into a run-it-from-anywhere team, and he's taken the same approach here. Forwards Sara Tunesi and Silvia Turani are brilliant, but the real fun is in their back three. Oramutso is rapid, slippery, a finisher. Vittoria Ostuni Manuzzi is bold as a yellow blazer and will run it from anywhere. But Alicia Dianca is the shit, man. I love Alicia Dianca. Watching her get the ball feels like slipping from watching sober to suddenly watching on the most drugs ever. And she does the most mental thing that doesn't seem like it should be possible, and yet it somehow comes off. She's just brilliant. It's something that can be intimidating, jumping from knowing near enough every player on both teams to barely any of your own, but I really do think that's a place to start. Learn your team. learn the squad, read up on them. So many athletes on this side of the game have amazing stories behind them. As a companion piece alongside this video, over on More Squid Rugby, our second channel, we're doing a rundown on every team to hopefully clue you in on key players and core tactics for your girls, because every nation is stacked with them. The Red Roses are basically a walking highlights reel. Centre Emily Scarrett might be the most iconic player in the history of the women's game. Fullback Ellie Kildun is having a touch of second season syndrome, but 1 year ago was borderline unplayable. I'm a huge fan of back row Sadia Kabea and particularly Abby Dow. Dow played just one game in 2024 without scoring and is on similar form this year. Arguably the best finisher in rugby right now. Shut up, Cheslin. Though she'll face another contender for that when the Roses take on Australia in the pool stage. Maya Stewart is a brilliant back three player, but Georgia Fredericks, or G-Fred as she's known to everyone but the police, probably should be in prison for doing some crazy filthy stuff on the field. She seems to do it weekly, but the real Wallaroo highlights are in the pack, particularly their tie head shirt, which is shared between Team of the Year alumni, Sevens playing prop Eve Kapani, and motorbike enthusiast Bridie O'Gorman, or Bog as she's known to nobody, including the police. There may be two of the most impressive, dynamic, exciting front row forwards in the game, and players who highlight a real other key difference area between men's and women's rugby. The tight head position, where a male number 3 is typically the least athletic player on the team and broadly just there to hold up and or dominate the scrum. In women's rugby, the tight head is an almost entirely different position. There are plenty of exceptions, of course, but the tight head is typically used as a second number 8. I mentioned the 4'9" Megumi Abe earlier, but the size differential between the biggest and smallest players in women's rugby is even greater than men's, particularly at professional standard, and the tight head is usually your physically biggest player. So do the maths. Loose heads get rolled out to do this too, but I'd say a good 90% of women's test teams use a prop as a primary ball carrier, often topping the charts for carries per minute. It's common for teams to use their tight head on a first phase crash after a line out instead of as a lifter, or work moves to get them into space and carrying against smaller players. In fact, props like England's Sarah Burnham and Maud Muir are used as edge forwards in the wide channels pretty regularly, or Wales' Cecilia Tuipulotu, Ireland's Linda Dugan, and the Aussie duo, often either interchangeable with number 8, or in Wales' case, sometimes just essentially are the number 8, allowing them to pick free flankers in the back row. Women's players have dominated the number 3 shirt in our team of the year since we started doing it back in 2018. For the real reason, women's rugby asks more of a tight head so you get more back in the performance. It's a different position, but perhaps the biggest shift between men's and women's rugby right now is the vibe, the crowds, the atmosphere. None of the relentlessness of competition is lost, but there is some intangible, different energy. The spirit feels, and this is just me pontificating on it, I don't know if I even stand by this, perhaps more directed towards always supporting your team and thus wanting the opposition to slip over. There's less antagonism in the air. That's probably an oversimplification, but there's a slight emphasis difference from the fandom in women's rugby that's made it a proper balm in any moments where the constant uncertainty, infighting, or bullshit has made men's rugby something you kind of want to wash yourself off over the last few years. Because ultimately, this is the same game. It's just everything else that's different. Women's rugby, to me, feels like a godsend solution to any queries about how we grow the game. Be it the competitive Canada and USA teams not having to compete with a men's equivalent of the NFL, the greater appeal to young fans, check how much longer players stay out after games to take photos and sign jerseys, the fact it's an extremely open, queer-friendly space, somewhere the game for everyone bullshit the rugby values police push constantly actually feels true, or the fact it just exists in a much less crowded market. Women's rugby means different things to different nations. The Fijiana winning the Olympic medal in 2021 has since been seen and discussed as a critical moment in Fijian feminism, dispelling an attitude that there are some things women can't and shouldn't do on the island. The Springbok women come from an even more diverse set of backgrounds than their men's team and have used that as a means of bridging communities during significant outreach programs. Pathways are now put in place to allow anyone from across the nation anywhere to become a Springbok, irregardless of gender, race, or socioeconomic background. England's Sarah Byrne has been at the forefront of a movement to reassess how we discuss female athletes' body image. And in Australia, they have a squad who, in the words of Captain Emily Chancellor, just love playing rugby. To pin down women's rugby as the men's game with one change would be just as incorrect as saying it's one single thing. A brighter, more open, more forward-looking version of the game it might be, but it's also more than that too. Women's rugby can be small and dirty and shithousey. Alex Cantor developing a reputation for untying opposition shoelaces is just as much a part of the game as Scotland star Fran McGee finishing a beautiful team try. Women's rugby can be huge and bold and glorious. Much will be made of the final selling out Twickenham for the first time ever, but I'm personally more excited for a few years' time when that just looks normal, when that's commonplace, when that happens every week. Women's rugby can be personal, emotional, and moving. A potential quarter or semi-final could see married couple Claudia and Cleo and Maloney McDonald play against each other, while several other sides boast couples fighting for their country together. Women's rugby can be many infinite things. Most of all, it can be rugby. And if you're already a fan of the men's game, you know just how high a recommendation that is.